There's no denying that the PlayStation 5's design is extremely striking. With its sweeping curves and iconic black and white colour palette, it's basically a modern sculpture, and it's undoubtedly going to go down as one of the most recognisable consoles ever. However, at the end of the day, it is, after all, just plastic, and feels mass-produced, which isn't a surprise because it is. But this has got me thinking, what if it was made out of higher quality materials? What if it was made out of brass? This video is sponsored by KiwiCo. More about them later. Brass is a centuries-old alloy of copper and zinc, and has historically had a wide range of uses from intricate decorative pieces to durable mechanical components. What makes it so exciting to use for homemade projects, however, is that it can be bent, cut, soldered to, and polished with relative ease, allowing for incredible results even using just basic tools, as I've discovered with some recent builds. Despite this workability, the PS5 is such an unusual shape that it's going to be a huge challenge to recreate its outer chassis with brass and still retain its sleek appearance. But if I get it right, it's going to look stunning. The first step is to strip the PlayStation right down to its individual components. This is actually fairly straightforward, and as you can see, it's quite a remarkable device internally, especially with its unique looking heatsink. Continuing the strip down process allows me to remove this central glossy plastic mid-cover, which is the first part I'm going to recreate in brass. For this, I'm starting with some sheeting that's 1.5mm thick to match the original part, but predictably marking its shape for cutting out is a bit tricky, as it's well curved so can't be easily flattened out. The solution for this is to instead make a template using paper, as it can be bent to match the part's curvature. Once cut out, it can simply be stuck to the brass and a jigsaw used to trim it down to match. This leaves me with quite a nice shape, and I can now manually bend it to copy the original curves. This takes ages to do accurately, but it's worth it, as with a little time, patience and precision, it ends up being an almost exact replica. Nice. There are a few more jobs to tackle here though before it can be considered complete, the first of which is recreating the power button. This button actually triggers a little surface mount switch mounted to a PCB on the back, and as brass is fairly soft, using files is a great way to make a replacement for it. The hump in the middle allows it to press against the surface mount switch, while the little side wings prevent it from falling through a groove made for it in the new brass front. As the switch's PCB needs to be held precisely in position for it to all work properly, I can simply solder some PCB pillar supports in place with a blowtorch. This is one of my favourite characteristics about brass, as when it reaches the right temperature, the solder just melts on contact and gets pulled in between each part by capillary action, resulting in a nice strong joint when cooled. Looking good. A similar process can be used for the front USB ports, and some additional mounting points will later allow it to be held securely to the console. Like everything, these need to be as accurate as possible for it to actually fit, but we'll have to wait until later to see whether it will or not. For now though, it's time to work on the trickiest part of this build, which is the side panels. I'm quite sceptical about being able to recreate these with brass, as they're such unusual shapes with opposing curved directions on each axis, so making this out of this is not going to be easy. Attempting to bend it by hand reveals another characteristic of brass that causes a few problems here, which is that, like many metals, it has a certain amount of elasticity. This basically means that it will spring back to its original shape unless it's forced past the point at which it yields and goes into plastic deformation. As you've perhaps predicted, this means that it's extremely difficult to put enough force into it to get it to bend at all, and despite trying for an hour or so, it just looks awful, and nothing close to what I need. Thankfully though, there is a way out here. Take this small strip of brass as an example. You can see its elasticity as I push against it, and if I push hard enough it goes into plastic deformation. If I wanted to bend it to touch the vise, however, nothing I do will make it stay flush, as its elasticity prevents it from fully yielding. However, things get interesting if I hold it in this position and then add some heat. Once cool again, it actually stays in this shape because the heat has relaxed the internal stresses in the brass in a process known as normalizing, and I can take advantage of this by devising an alternative construction method for the new side panels. For this, I'm going to make a template of the original panels by tracing each outer edge onto some strips of wood and then cut them carefully out using the lines as a guide. After sticking them to a sheet of MDF, you can hopefully see where this is going, as the wood perfectly matches the original panel's outer shape. With the original panel removed, my brass sheeting is going to be pushed against this wooden framework using the other side of the cuts to help it form the curves properly, and as I'm going to be using a lot of heat in just a minute, I've wrapped each one in foil to help avoid charring. With the help of clamps, these pieces really do force the brass into shape, and it's looking quite promising. But for reasons I explained earlier, if I were to undo the clamps now without any extra steps, it would just return to being a perfectly flat piece of brass, as it hasn't been pushed past any yielding point, and this is where the heating process comes into play. Out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to do this outside, as heating brass up a lot can produce nasty vapours. It's unlikely that I'll hit anywhere near temperatures that will result in this, but it's better safe than sorry, especially as it's such a nice day outside. Taking a close look at the brass as I heat it, we can see that it's actually changing in shape as parts of it increase in temperature, and it's certainly looking less solid. There is a strange discoloration patch in the middle though, which also seems to be disformed. With it now cooled, we can take a look at it, and there's some good news and some bad news here. The good news is that once the clamps are released, the metal stays in its newly curved form, which is the exact result I was hoping for after the heating process. However, taking a quick look underneath, we can see that the internal side of it has bent inwards substantially, causing it to touch the MDF and char it, which is what caused the ugly patch. This means that while the outer curves are absolutely on point and match the original panels closely, the inside is warped far enough inwards to prevent the panel from sitting properly against the side of the PlayStation. So it's time for some modifications, and this time I've thickened the base MDF to make it even stiffer and covered the inside mounting pegs of the panel with blue tack. This is because I'm going to make a plaster mould with it to perfectly copy its shape on the inside of my frame, and having the blue tack there allows it to release easily once the plaster's set. Having not worked with plaster of Paris before though, I foolishly didn't think to read the instructions about it and, well, basically wasted it all as it set before I could get it into the chamber. Oh dear.